Hey guys, what's up? This is TJ Luckman. I'm with Ben Folman here. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm all right. This is the brand new, brand spanking new Puck Luck podcast. A lot of what we're going to be talking about on this podcast, you know, Ben and I are big advanced stats guys. We disagree a lot on how they're supposed to be used. So we kind of figured that would be good for a radio program or a podcast or something. So we want to make it sound interesting. Would you say that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So today what we want to do for those who are not as initiated or brand new to advanced stats or just think they're all around fooey, what we want to do is we kind of want to introduce you to really what the most basic stats were most people are using today. It's not really a brand new thing. It's kind of a brand new thing for public view. It's really come on in the past, I'd say 2 years. There have been great, fantastic writers who have been hired by NHL teams, and now we're left to pick up the slack.
Yeah, so I guess we could start off with just the two most commonly used ones with Corsi and Fenwick. Uh, and they're often called possession stats because they are kind of used to quantify a team's possession based on how many times a team is shooting at the goal.
Right, and the important thing to remember about Corsi is that we use Corsi kind of as a proxy as to what we're looking at for. We use it as a proxy for possession. So what I mean to say is counting the actual time limit that a team is possessing the puck or that a player is possessing the puck. There's no sort of tracking in the NHL, any sort of video tracking where it's even remotely possible to do that unless you have 12 different humans with a stopwatch, you know, pressing on and on to a stopwatch for each player each time a player touches the puck, you know. So we use Corsi as a proxy because the idea is if a team is shooting the puck, whether it's a missed shot, it's a block shot, or it's a shot on net, if a team is shooting the puck, that means that team has possession of the puck.
Yeah. So, and just as I guess a brief uh, distinguishing thing is that Corsi and Fenwick are not the exact same. It's just
They're
like
brothers.
Fenwick just doesn't count the block shots. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No,
Corsi is block shots, missed shots, and black shots. Fenwick is missed shots and shots.
Yeah. And they're really close, but there's different things. Like Corsi, you use more of really as a possession. That's, like I said before, you use it as a proxy of possession. When you get into Fenwick, Fenwick is really, people say that it's more of a scoring chance type deal thing. I think scoring chances I think it's way too hard to quantify something as a scoring chance, since usually a scoring chance is completely subjective. A lot of stats that the NHL uses are completely subjective to whoever the stat keeper is watching the game that
Yeah,
night.
like
So,
takeaways and giveaways.
oh, I don't even want to talk about those. We should do a show, now that I think about it, we should do a show on like completely useless stats. That'll be really fun.
Yeah.
Um, but that's for another time, I would say. But yeah, giveaways, takeaways. Yeah, those are completely, and hits. Hits is my favorite one. Because the hits, have you ever noticed that normally, unless you're like the Detroit Red Wings or Chicago is not really a hitting team. They're more of a skilled team. I mean, they're two of the only teams that really don't win hitting battles per se. But most of the time, you'll find that the home team comes out on top in the hitting battle. So take that how you will. But
Yeah.
I
And
digress.
also, there's a lot, we'll say, a lot of people um, would suggest, and I think correctly so, and there's a lot of hockey writers have written on this, but that um, you're not checking people when your team has the puck.
Right. I think,
And it's kind of so it's inversely related to possession in that sense that yeah, it's if you controlled for possession, it might be a measure of physicality, but you can't really, yeah. That
I
when you control for possession, that's kind of half the reason a hit is important per se is
yeah.
that it's to try to get possession from the other team. So if you're controlling for possession, it becomes kind of a useless stat.
I think my favorite thing. I'm gonna miss Dallas Aikens as Edmonton's coach because not because I'm an Edmonton fan, but Dallas Aikens put it perfectly once. He said, somebody in the press conference room was asking him if he was concerned about the Oilers' low level of hits, like if he thought the Oilers should have more hits. And Aikens said, "You know what I think? I think the perfect game is zero hits because if you have zero hits, that probably means you have the puck." Because
Yeah.
yeah, the logic there actually doesn't really work. I think it was something more along the lines of if you're hitting more often, that probably means you don't have the puck. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Mm.
I probably screwed up that quote. I only watched it like 2 weeks ago, so.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that one, so
Now Akins doesn't get a lot of credit because he's the Edmonton coach, he got fired, but I think they pulled the plug on him too soon.
yeah,
Um,
not the first time either.
yeah, I know. I thought Akins was a really smart coach, really knows what he's doing, but there's something about, the players weren't listening to him. I don't know. I think that's kind of crap. You have guys like Taylor Hall, and they say that Taylor Hall was uncoachable, but was it Tyler Dello, MC79 Hockey? He works for Edmonton now, correct? Yeah,
Um,
he works
yeah,
for the Oilers. Yeah, he came out with something. Taylor Hall used Akins when he first came in. There was a big thing about he wanted to have his players carry the puck over the blue line, and McTavish pretty much said, no, we want to be more of a dump and chase team. Um, and I think that was one of the biggest things that Dello pointed to was that Hall completely changed his game because he stopped carrying the puck and he started doing the dump and chase. For a while, he wasn't because, as we've seen some more studies, it's actually more effective to carry the puck in over the blue line rather than do a dump and chase. For
yeah,
most teams. Teams like the LA Kings actually do a dump and chase game extremely effectively, but they're also a very physical team in how they play the puck. It works towards their style.
yeah. And
So
I wouldn't even just limit it to teams, but a lot of times just personnel on the ice, which I guess you were kind of alluding to. But
yeah, yeah, I mean, in general, the LA Kings have the personnel that like to throw the body around. They're a very physical team. I
and
mean,
tie it up
up
along the boards and win those board battles.
exactly.
Yeah.
But anyways, I digress. I feel like I'm getting very off topic here. I'm sorry. So we were on Corsi and Fenwick. Um, something that most people like to do. The biggest thing you'll see with Corsi and Fenwick is what's called the Corsi and Fenwick close. And if Ben wants to explain that.
Actually, I was gonna before we do that, I do want to mention the two quick ways that Corsi and Fenwick are kind of measured in games that you'll see them measured. A
Sure.
lot of times you'll see them as like for a given player or a given team, you'll see like Corsi for and against in a given game. Like let's say Tyler Sagan is 11 for and 4 against. That means there were 11 Corsi events for his team while he was on the ice and 4 against his team while he was on the ice, resulting in a net of +7. You can also see one of like game events. Like the Pittsburgh Penguins had 55 Corsi events, and as opposed to the Columbus Blue Jackets, who had 41.
Right.
So that's the yeah, that's just one way I wanted to yeah
And
clarify that. But now moving on to Corsi.
actually,
Sorry,
actually,
what?
I'm sorry. Now that I think about it, I think before we move on to really the close statistics, I think we should talk first about relative stats. You kind of got into a little bit. You know, you single out a player. You singled out Tyler Seguin. You're thinking about Tyler Seguin. You're thinking about a guy that's good on the puck. He's got a great shot. Um, and as Ben was saying, essentially, I'm, I, you excuse me. With, with Sagan, we measure what Sagan does on the ice, with his Corsi events. What the relative stats do is they take one player's on ice Corsi for, Corsi against, pretty much what we call the Corsi for percentage, which is essentially Corsi for over all Corsi events. And then we take that and we compare it to the Corsi events, all the Corsi events that happen while a certain player is off the ice. That's what we call a relative stat.
Yeah, and there's one of the hockey sites that kind of does a lot of the stats compiling. Instead of comparing it to when he's on the ice versus when he's off the ice, he does it with the teammates he plays against, or sorry, the teammates he plays with. Like, I forgot which site it is, but I thought it was kind of a cool idea where it's like the line mates, what his line mates numbers are when he's on the ice, and what his line mates numbers are when he's off the ice.
Are you talking about like a WOWY, a WOWY, with or without you stat? I believe
it's kind of like that, but I think it's abbreviated like Corsi TM is for like teammates on the site I'm thinking of.
Is it hockeyanalysis.com?
Yeah, I think so. Are they the one with like the regressed, like the goals for 20, goals against 20?
Yes.
And yeah, okay, yeah.
That is stats.hockeyanalysis.com. That's one, in my opinion, it's one of the most well done sites, if not for its clutter. And unfortunately, a few months ago, we lost probably one of the most attractive stat sites in the Extra Skater. The guy who ran that site actually got hired by the Toronto Maple Leafs, but he put together an excellent looking site, made it so easy to read all this stuff. And then when he got hired, apparently Toronto asked him to shut it down because it hasn't been up since. And now we're stuck looking for the scraps. Of course, in its place, there have been a few that have come up that I really do like. War on Ice is actually my favorite one.
War on Ice does a lot of stuff that you can like download not all their like databases, but all their like data.
You can download them as Excel files, and that is so awesome.
Yeah, it is ridiculously useful, and if you're good at Excel or SPSS or probably R, even though I don't know anything about R, I'm guessing that too, it makes everything so much easier.
Yeah. No, it does, especially since I don't find War on Ice to be an attractive site, but if I can put something into Excel, that is just fantastic.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, I digress. So we got into a little bit of, the relative stats. Relative stats are, I question them sometimes because you're really only comparing it to your own team rather than
there's a place
around the NHL. It's relative stats are really good when you're comparing just one team, but they're not good when you're comparing other players with players on other teams because players are used differently. So when I'm comparing players on the same team, that's when I like to use the relative stat a lot.
Yeah.
So
Even
um,
though it like that the stats that dot hockey analysis site uses, you also have to keep in mind who you're playing with, and that you're those stats can be skewed a little bit even when you're comparing within the same team
right,
because
and that's
you're
why
playing on the top line with two all-star skaters all the time. It's going to look a lot better than the guy who might be equally as good playing on the third line just
right,
because of the talent there.
right, and that's why I really like hockeyanalysis.com. I really like that their their with or without you feature, where pretty much what it does is it takes you can it's a page of an entire player. Like take Bobby Ryan for example, last year with the Senators. Bobby Ryan, hold on, I'd have to bring him up, but I remember reading. I mean, just looking at this page, Bobby Ryan played better when he was on the ice with Kyle Turris and and Clark MacArthur. Clark, both of those increased what his possession stats were on the team for Corsi at least, his Corsi for percentage. And when he didn't play with them, it was interesting. You saw kind of a stark drop, but you also saw the the Corsi percentages of MacArthur and Turris rise, which I think that's very interesting. Of course, last year Bobby Ryan was playing hurt. He did have a hernia, so that
Yeah,
was troublesome. But I think that's interesting. And somebody did write that quality of teammates is a lot more important than what your quality of competition is.
yeah.
Um, again, that's another conversation for another day. But
Hmm.
again, that with or without you stuff is just so interesting to look at sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
So
So I
let's.
guess what were we
We
on,
were
I
talking
guess?
we were talking about relative stats, and I have this nasty tendency to
Oh, yeah.
go on to other topics, and but let's see. So we got the against stats, and here's the relative. Now the next thing we wanted to do that I brought up, but I skipped over, um, the here we have this talking points thing in front of us. It says close, but really I just want to get into situational stats in general. Um, this is something that we call score adjusted possession metrics, which I think is extremely important because essentially we adjust for the score. If you look simply at Corsi in a vacuum, you're not going to get anything out of these stats. Um, simply seeing that, a player like Patrice Bergeron is a bad example. Um, take a take a player like I can't think of a good player to use as an example here, who has a good Corsi like all around. But when you look a little bit closer, like when you look at Fenwick close numbers, what that essentially does is it takes one situation during a game where you're either tied or within one goal of your opponent, and it isolates those Corsi stats. That's what we call Fenwick close. And that's somebody did an awesome infographic a few years ago. I want to say 2011 or 2012, shortly after the Kings won their first cup. And it was an infographic of all the teams. It was like a bullseye, pretty much. And it had which teams were in the playoffs, which teams won the Stanley Cup. And it ended up being that most teams with the highest Fenwick close numbers were Stanley Cup winners, or in the Stanley Cup final, or at least in the top four. Like your best Fenwick teams were all in that mix.
Yeah, was I'm not familiar with what you're referencing. Was that in the playoffs or during the regular season?
See, that's what I'm not sure. I can't remember. I'm going to try to bring it up. I'm going to put it in the sidebar over here. But it was really, really interesting. And of course, I'm not sure if if the article I'm thinking of course, I'm just going to search Fenwick chart. And oh, yeah, it's a Deadspin article, actually, which is, it can be so hit or miss there. But, okay, so I have this picture here. I'm going to tweet out this picture as well. On my personal account. My personal account's at TJLuckman550.
And mine's at Dancing on Highway, but spelled HWY, Dancing on HWY.
So let's see here. So I'm throwing this in the sidebar here. If anybody's really looking. So Ben, if you want to take a look at that, pretty much it's a really interesting. Essentially, you really want to be around the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so as you go more top right, that's like your lower numbers. Here you have I believe they don't mark the years here, but I believe that is the 2006 Atlanta Thrashers, who, if not for the Sabres, are arguably the worst Fenwick team of all time. The Sabres are probably going to blow them away by the end of this season. But as it stands right now, the Atlanta Thrashers of 2006 were the worst in Fenwick Close of all time. And they ended up second last, I believe. And I think that's the year that Tampa Bay got the first overall pick. So was that 2008?
I'm not sure. Wait, that was the year they.
I want to say, now that I think about it, the 07-08 Thrashers were the horrifically bad Fenwick team. And they ended up finishing second and losing the lottery to Tampa Bay.
Wait, finishing second?
It's second last.
I was going to say, yeah, because it was like 2 years before they did finish second.
Yeah, they finished top of their division, actually. It's the only time.
Oh, I'm in second of the conference, I think.
Yeah, no, it's the only time the Thrashers ever made the playoffs.
Yeah.
I believe they were third because they played the Rangers and got swept by the sixth. And then the Rangers were the sixth place team, which I thought was hilarious.
They had some really, really talented guys, but at the same time, when you look at the roster, it's not exactly going to blow you away. I think the goaltending pair was like Lettinen and Hedberg or something.
And Lettinen was hurt all the time.
Yeah. It was pretty much Kozlov, Hossa, and Kovalchuk carrying the team.
But I mean, just check out teams that have finished between 40% and 45% Fenwick percentage. None of those teams have ever made the playoffs. Only 6 times has that ever happened where a team had below 45% Corsi for percentage. Then you go over on the left side of the chart is between 45 and 50%. 31% of those teams have made the playoffs. You get to 50% to 55%. 76% of those teams have made the playoffs of 66 teams. And this chart, I believe, is between 2006 and 2012. Yeah, it's 2012. That was the first time the Kings won the Cup. And the one in this bottom right corner over here, 100% of teams that have finished with above 55% Fenwick have made the playoffs. And 2 of them have won Stanley Cups. 3 of them have made the finals out of 8 teams. So I think this is an important time to bring up that advanced stats don't mean, if you have the best advanced stats, that doesn't mean you're going to win the Cup. Does it mean that you're probably more likely to win the cup? Maybe. It's more of we try to use these stats as predictors of future success rather than historical records, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I got off on a humongous tangent, but it was still related to that. Um, we look at these close metrics because we want to know when teams step up when they're most needed to, when the score is close, when it's tied at 0, tied at 1, tied at 4 and late in a game, something like that, or even if it's tied at 2 in the second period. We want to know which players take take more shots than the other team, give their team more chances for success for scoring goals. And that's why we look at these close, because really that's the time that you really want somebody to step up and do that.
Yeah. And also the style of game is kind of different when you're, trying to protect a 4 goal lead,
Right. If you're trying to
and when you're, just when you're close, and also when you're just kind of completely out of it, or even trying to mount a huge comeback and you're going with a lot of high risk, high reward type of plays.
right. I think last year there was a game between the Ducks and the Winnipeg Jets. I think the Jets had like a 4-1 lead and the Ducks came back to win 5-4. Um, But I mean, if you looked at what their Fenwick was when the score was 4-1 Jets, like the Ducks destroyed the Jets in Fenwick, which makes sense though, because the Jets are sitting on a 3-goal lead. Teams typically don't play as aggressive when they have a 3-goal lead, um, and these stats show that. Um, I guess in this case we are looking at it as a historical record, and the stats show that teams generally are not aggressive when they have big leads of 2 or more. But when the score is closer, teams kind of get to what their true nature is when they really need to get goals. So it's hard to do that. That's why we try not to look at these things in a vacuum and B on a game by game basis. Because you can have a game where the Chicago Blackhawks are facing the Buffalo Sabres. Chicago, I mean, they are worlds apart from what this current Sabres team is. And Chicago will go ahead what? Like hypothetically Chicago goes ahead 5-0. So at the end of the game, you're looking at the Corsi Fenwick stats, even the shooting stats. It's like, oh, they were kind of equal around shots. Well, yeah, but at the same time, Chicago had a 5-goal lead. They had no reason to keep playing aggressive.
Yeah, you're gonna take your foot off the gas, especially on a back-to-back night.
Right,
Like there's no point in trying to run up the score or anything.
right. So,
Just burn off the clock.
right. So that's why I like to look at these stats when mostly when teams are close, because that really gives me a message of what the teams are trying to do
Yeah.
when it really counts. So I think that's all I have on situational stats in general. Quality of competition, I'm not a huge fan of. I don't know what you have to say about it, Ben.
Oh no, I just wanted to say that in a lot of some of the more, um, I guess, advanced applications of these statistics, a lot of times they will adjust for the quality of competition in determining, like that site we were referencing earlier. I know they have like an overall like offensive and overall defensive like grade,
Mm-hmm.
and part of and it
I
combines
believe
goals for
it's
20, goals against 20, uh, your um, your teammates goals for 20, teammates goals against 20.
Are you talking about like the O heart,
Yeah,
the D heart, and then the heart,
yeah.
something like that?
It's like the haro or and hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Haro heart for
and
team.
then they use that to determine like every player's base level of those stats, and then
Mhm.
they regress them against each other. So your teammates' quality and your opponent's quality from that previous iteration is used in multiple iterations after that. Like, did I guess a better way to put it is they first determine how good your goals for 20 and goals against are to determine your how good your teammates are and your opponents are, and they quantify everything in one number. And then they use the same formula they used, but use that new number to determine how good your opponents are and your teammates to generate a better number. And then they use that better number again in the formula and keep doing that.
Yeah. Uh, to me, that's extremely busy, and
It is, but
I'm
those,
really not sure what
yeah.
it shows.
I guess it shows that here is, well, you mean what it shows as a,
As a, s-
what the multiple iterations are for, or what the stat itself shows?
yeah, what is? I mean, I've never really understood it. What does the stat itself really show?
It's an attempt to quantify how good a given player is in a way that you can compare them like across the league. You can take Giroux and you can compare him to Getzlaff. Despite playing on different teams, despite playing on different lines with different opponents, it's ideally a way to quantify these how good they are at offense and defense, so you can compare players on different teams.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the only problem is I don't know how good it actually works, because I remember I on a previous podcast I was on, I brought this up that I believe it was last year, maybe at the midpoint of the season, 7 of the 9 people that were rated top in defense played on either the Kings or the Bruins, which are great defensive hockey teams. I forgot if it was forwards or players in general, but 7 of the 9 best players on defense were on the Bruins or the Kings. And those two teams also happen to have very good goalies.
Right.
So, and when you're using a goals for versus goals against metric,
And
it's I kind of have a problem with it there.
and pe
So,
and people who are negative against advanced statistics, sometimes I'm not even sure why we call them advanced statistics for what we're using them for. I mean, to me, I feel that stuff like Corsi, people would be so much more receptive to it if we just called them shot attempts. You know what I mean?
yeah, or yeah,
I
just
mean,
and it's not very
it's not advanced.
yeah, it's not very advanced. I also
The
don't like when
advanced
people call them analytics because it's not really analyzing anything. It's just a statistic.
Well, the advanced part comes in when you get in these close situations.
Yeah, yeah,
You're looking at
exactly.
the relativity of it, which when you're using relative, when you're using, Corsi close, then I can see it being called an analytical approach. When you start crunching these numbers together, when you start defining what you're doing, that's when you really get into the analytics of it.
Yeah, and
Um,
because you're actually doing analysis and not just you know
exactly. So,
checking off. Okay, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3.
right.
So
So
yeah,
sometimes I think advanced stats, the advanced part of it can be a misnomer. But I digress. Speaking of things that sound advanced but are not actually advanced, um, next thing on our list to talk about is something called PDO. Where the
yeah.
name came from, it came from some sort of message board. where some guy simply just started adding up team save percentage while the player is on the ice plus shooting percentage while the player is on the ice. For whatever reason, this guy decided to call it PDO because PDO sounded cool. In fact, a lot of names, a lot of names for our quote unquote advanced metrics, a lot of times it's because the names sound cool. Corsi was I'm not kidding. Bob McKenzie's
Yeah,
book. I don't know if you've read Bob McKenzie's new book.
it's on my long to read list.
Yes, it's one of them. Um, no, Bob McKenzie. Follow him at TSN Bob McKenzie. He has a new book out um, called Confidential: Inside Stories from People Inside the Game, and he has a chapter on advanced stats. I haven't been able to read the book yet, but I did read some of the excerpts from that chapter. And the guy who created the Corsi stat, or started calling it the Corsi stat, everybody thinks that Jim Corsi's the one that made the stat, which technically they're right. But the guy picked up on the stat by listening to an interview that former Sabres GM Darcy Regier was giving about shot metrics and how the Sabres actually like to take all the shot attempts and keep those stats instead. And the guy who created them thought that the Regier number sounded stupid. So he went to the Sabres website. He went to the Sabres website and found Jim Corsi's name on the site and thought, "Huh, that sounds really cool." Little did he know, that Jim Corsi was actually the guy that started keeping track of these metrics. So I mean, it's a complete accident that he correctly identified the stat under the right guy's name.
Yeah,
which I
that's
think,
awesome. I
which
did not know about that.
which I think is awesome. But I digress. Um, yeah,
But
well, I
yeah,
was
so
talking about how
PDO,
stats get names. Yeah, PDO is a
there's
funny stat. It
it kind of
simply
goes all
takes.
across the board. People have lots of different opinions on it. Some people call it probably the most common thing I've heard is that it's the luck stat. Then there are people who say that it's a good stat to use, and people who say it's actually the opposite, that it should be used as an indicator for which teams are going to regress or not regress.
Regress
Uh,
is actually a good word for it.
yeah,
That's essentially how I use it. Teams, I mean,
yeah, regress because you'll regress towards the mean, I guess. You'll
right.
regress towards yeah.
Essentially, the way the stat is made out to be is that PDO, you have your team save percentage and then your on ice shooting percentage. Normalized, that stat should add up to about 100. 90%, with a 90% save percentage and a 10% shooting percentage. That's generally average. And the biggest thing that fluctuates in that is usually the team save percentage. Because most teams don't shoot for 10%. If you go to War on Ice, like I can tell you right now, going by the team metrics at War on Ice, 5-on-5, um, not adjusted for any sort of score. Let's see. The highest on ice shooting percentage. Well, first, the lowest one is 5.7 to Carolina. Um, as our good buddy Paul, a Carolina fan, would say, the Carolina Hurricanes are actually pretty good with their Corsi stats. They're 51.2 Corsi for percentage, even strength in all score situations, but they have a 5.7 on ice shooting percentage. That is just horrible, which is insane to me since they have a guy like Eric Stahl on the team who is a pretty decent goal scorer. But then again, they do have a guy like Alex Semin, who's probably one of the most errant hockey players ever. He could have the greatest 5 game stretch and then the worst 10 game stretch to follow up with that. Like, it's so hit or miss.
And he strikes me as the type of person that will take shots to increase his on ice Corsi.
I
Like he just strikes me as that type of guy.
I disagree with that to a point because most players don't give a crap about that. They do not.
I guess
I
but
see
if
I see what you're saying. I
there
see
was a guy, I feel like he'd be up there.
I see what you're
In people
saying.
I could see that out of.
So 5-on-5, the highest shooting percentage in the league right now for a team is 9.8%. Ben, can you guess what team is shooting 9.8% right now?
Um, Let me think.
And I mean, this
Probably
is
the
going
team
across
that's
3 months.
probably the team that is the. Let me think. I'm gonna go with the Lightning, maybe.
The Lightning are third. The Lightning are
Okay.
at 9%.
I'm just trying to think of teams that are probably scoring more than their possession stats would say.
Well, the Lightning are a bad example then, because I mean, the Lightning are their Corsi for percentage for the season, and again, this is in a vacuum, so, but their Corsi for percentage for this entire season so far is 54.2%.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that they don't have good
Oh, okay.
possession numbers. I'm saying that I think aren't they the highest scoring team in the league in like goals for though?
Let's see. They have 83 goals for. Yes, they
Wait,
are. They
okay.
are. The team that has the highest on ice
Maybe
shooting percentage.
Toronto actually, because they I
There
know
you
they're on high
go.
score.
That's it.
Okay.
It is
Yeah, 'cause
Toronto.
I was gonna say
Toronto,
they have horrible. They're horrible, but score goals.
which, well, I mean, when you have players like Phil Kessel, you have guy like James Van Riemsdyk, um, and even Tyler Bozak's been a good goal scorer this year,
Yeah, so kind of surprising.
which is
He's finally
funny.
living up to his
Yeah,
first line center role, I guess.
yeah, okay. Um, um, something had to happen eventually, right? No,
Yeah.
but Toronto. Another thing that we'll have to talk about eventually is that there is an element of goal scoring to this whole shebang here
Yeah.
that's really more recently taken the spotlight. Um, there's an element of goal scoring to this whole Corsi Fenwick thing, where if your team can't score goals, then Corsi Fenwick isn't worth anything.
Yeah.
So, but which
It doesn't just end up being possession stats, and even though there's a lot of data out there, and people have written on it ad nauseum about how
mhm.
uh, your the Corsi is a better predictor than shot percentage, and same with Fenwick. But there when you see teams go a whole 82 game season and their their shooting percentage is significantly deviated from, I guess, what you would call the norm. Because if it is all about Corsi, then there is one shooting percentage that the whole team should be around.
Right.
I guess depending on the quality of your goalies that you're facing. But when you do have teams that are significantly off, when you have one team at 9.5% and then one team at 6.5% over an 82 game period, it's very hard to argue that quality of shots don't play some role. So,
Yeah. And I think I was talking to you about this
and
the other
just
day.
ability to score on a shot.
Right. And I think I was talking to you about this the other day, and I don't take shot quality too much into account just because it's the same reason why we don't use plus minus as a good indicator anymore. A goal happens way less frequently than a shot, and that's why we use shots as a measure of possession. That's why we're using this more for teams. to measure how they're playing rather than just, a team goal differential or whatever. Because, I mean, teams go through bad stretches. Teams have bad seasons where just things just don't seem to go their way, and sometimes that's not really fair. So I have trouble taking into account shot quality sometimes just because it's on the same level to me that quality shots don't occur as much as not quality shots. But, that's another conversation for another
Yeah.
day. PDO, that's what we were talking about and why I got on the topic of on-ice shooting percentages. I mean, essentially what we're looking at is an average of about 92% for
Save
save
percentage.
percentage and about an 8% for on-ice shooting percentage. Before I said 10 and 90, but I had to look that up because that didn't seem right.
Yeah.
But essentially, a PDO of 100 is pretty much saying that your team is going the course that it should be. It's doing, it's gonna win, it's gonna lose. A PDO of over 100 usually means that a team is overperforming what they're supposed to be doing, and a PDO of under 100 pretty much says that a team is underperforming. There's
Although,
there's certain levels to that. Some teams just simply can't save the puck, can't score. So you have your teams like Edmonton, whose PDO is probably pretty low. It's 96.5. I mean, I would put a normal. Their save percentage is 89.7, on ice shooting percentage of 6.8%. You know,
mhm.
they're a team. Their goaltending is garbage, but they have scores. I think they have Taylor Hall. They have Ryan Nugent Hopkins, who's a good playmaker. He's still very raw. He's still very young, but he's a good player. They have Jordan Eberle, another guy who can find the net fairly simply. But I mean, they're shooting 6.8%, and you want to be more around the 7.5, 8 range. Um, but so to me, their shooting percentage can most certainly go up, but their goaltending is just horrible. So I mean that can go up too, but I don't see them getting any more than really a 98 or a 99 PDO.
Yeah.
So there's certain teams that just simply are not good scoring and not good at you
Saving the
know
puck. Yeah.
saving the puck, and that's just kind of how they're going to be.
Yeah, and I kind of wish that PDO was 100 minus PDO or PDO minus 100,
Yeah,
just
that would make
because
sense.
when you have stuff like 98.7 versus 98.9, it seems like such a small difference. I actually think the same thing with save percentage. People say, well, 92.8 and 92.4, it's not that different. But when you look at it as 7.6 and 7.2,
Yeah. No,
that's now it's a 5% difference.
yeah, no, I see what you mean. Um, so. But I mean, that's really what I have to say about PDO. It's like you said, it's called the luck stat. I think there's a level of that to it, but really, I think it's better described as regression.
Yeah.
So now the final thing we have on our list here that we wanted to talk about today, and just kind of an introduction to this, we have zone starts. Zone starts are actually one of my favorite things that we use to analyze a player's game. A lot of times, what we'll do is we'll see that a player has, a 55% Corsi for percentage. So then the next thing you want to do is where is he starting most of his where is he usually starting right off the face-off? Is he starting in the offensive zone? Some coaches, in my opinion, good coaches start their best offensive players in the offensive zone. They start their best defensive players in the defensive zone. Like take Chicago for example. I believe believe a guy, Jonathan Taves is a better defensive player. I'm imagining he gets more of a 50-50 split. But a guy like Patrick Kane gets probably 60% of his draws, not counting the neutral zone, in the
Yeah.
offensive zone. And that can be very beneficial for players. Whereas players like Jonathan Taves have a 55% Corsi for percentage. These are arbitrary numbers. I'm using them on. To me, anything over 50% for Corsi is good, and anything under 50% is not so good. So when I'm throwing out these numbers, I'm throwing out arbitrary numbers. Obviously, Jonathan Taves is a good player. He's usually one of the better possession players. So he has a higher possession. So the next thing you want to see is where he's starting where his own starts are. Jonathan Taves starts a lot in the defensive zone, so to have a Corsi for percentage as high as he does without adjusting for zone starts, because a lot of people now will do that by taking the first 10 seconds off of a play and adjusting for that. I know hockeyanalysis.com does that, which I think is really cool. But you got a player like Taves who starts most of his his shifts in the defensive zone, and he still is a good possession player. He's still generating a lot of shots, and I think that's the mark of a very efficient, a very complete player.
Yeah. And one of my favorites too.
Of course.
Yeah. Marion Hossa also, I think, fits that mold on the
Yeah, no,
Blackhawks.
Hoss is one of the few wingers who's very good at that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, most of your best possession players are your top centers. Um, but Marian Hossa is one of the few wingers that I think is a very good possession player that can do it regardless of who his center is. He's one of the most underrated skilled players of all time because of where he's played. And it's funny that I say that he's underrated even in Chicago, because Chicago has so many good players. Hossa should have been in the spotlight, and he's not because he doesn't have to be, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
So, and
It's kind
you
of
were,
the understated workhorse of the team, which
oh
is one
yeah,
of I
no,
really like him.
which it's insane that last year he wasn't even up for Selke. You got your generic Jonathan Taves, Patrice Bergeron, and Anze Kopitar, who, believe me, they're all deserving, but Marian Hossa really needs to get some love in that department.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, so I figured you might.
Yeah.
Zach Parise is another one too.
Oh yeah. Actually,
Zach,
a lot of yeah. The Wild have. We could have an entire podcast on the Wild actually,
oh,
because
well, seeing as more than half of my team are now Minnesota Wild, between Thomas Vanek and Jason Pominville, and let's be honest, they were pretty much the Sabres for a while, along with Ryan Miller. Um, Jason Pominville is another one of those wingers who, to this, I still cannot believe he was not on the Olympic team last year, because we really needed those sandpaper guys like Dustin Brown and Ryan Callahan, who, don't get me wrong, they're really good players, but
yeah, it turned into an all-star team, not a the best hockey team.
well, I think that's where we get into what really makes a good hockey team. I mean, NHL teams field, third lines of quote unquote grinding players, kind of because they have to. Um, Whereas with the Olympics, it's like you have some of the best scorers in the world. Why would you not want to put all of them together? I mean, the U.S.
Yeah, fair point. I guess I'm just thinking of basketball. How if you're trying to make like a basketball dream team, you would rather have you need your role players. You could have your Michael Jordans, but you don't just need scores. You need I mean, what's if you're going to have four great scorers? Do you really need Allen Iverson, or do you go John Stockton, someone who can distribute it, or Magic Johnson? If you're
Yeah,
putting together like a, so I guess that's a more important sport that putting together a team is more important than just putting together talent. But I still think it applies to an extent here.
I mean, to me, to me, I don't find a lot of use out of players that simply. Steve Ott is a perfect example. He's a player that fan bases fall in love with, um, but he's really not any good in driving possession of the puck. And it's maddening because people, he generally has the most hits in the league, and it's just like, when he ends up on a winning team, people point to Steve Ott as to, a big part of that, and I don't see that at all. Um, so I guess my point is, it's like role players are fine, but they have to be able to do other things than just
Oh yeah.
be grinders.
I guess what I was more referring to is
I think
you have to have a power play unit.
right.
You have to have a penalty kill unit. If you load up on all just pure goal scorers and just a bunch of people that
Oh
the
yeah,
Stan
no.
coaches of the league, the Perrys of the league, but you don't have the
The Joe
um,
Thorntons.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah.
You
No,
have to have your
that I
setup men. You
totally.
have to have your goal scorers. You have to have people that can kill penalties. You have to have people that can move the puck, enter zones. You have to have a complete team in that respect, and it's just that it often highly correlates with talent. I'm not saying that you should make sure you have a checking line for the Olympics.
Right.
That's not
Okay.
at
Okay.
all.
So
Yeah,
we were dancing around the same point,
yeah,
and we're really just confused by what we were saying. So,
yeah,
all right. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, anyways, I was like completely floored that Jason Pominville. I think he's one of the best wingers, best American wingers in the game. Um, and he wasn't even he didn't even make the camp. This we're talking about a guy that you know is a 70-point player, 60 to 70-point player in the NHL year after year. Generally gets 25 to 30 goals, 40 to 50 assists. I mean, that's and it's he's consistently done this his entire career, and I feel he's one of the more underappreciated players in the game today. And he's a
yeah,
good and he's a great possession player. Um, he's actually very underrated in his possession. Was always one of the better relative players on when he was with the Sabres, and the Sabres actually had some good possession stats. So, but I digress. Jason Pominville is another one of those wingers that you can throw him in the defensive zone and he'll still come out with a 52% Corsi or whatever. Like he's
yeah.
he's just a good player. But anyways, you said
Zone starts.
you, you said well. I mean, I related that. That was
Yeah, yeah.
that was
I
part
know.
of it.
I just don't get me wrong. I love the tangents. I just find it funny how far we got with that one.
Yeah, well, it's. I mean, you have a guy like zone starts are funny too for a guy like John Scott, who essentially is when Ted Nolan. That was actually one of the good things he did with Scott or Cody McCormick and guys like that. Um, it always started him in the offensive zone. You know, drive it there. And it always inflated their Corsi, and I thought it was hilarious because people would just be like, "Oh, well, John Scott is a really good Corsi." It's just like, well, he's also only getting like 6 minutes a night. He's probably on the ice. A shot is taken. He's like, "All right, gotta go to the bench."
Yeah,
I mean, players that get less than 10 minutes a night. I mean, essentially they're considered enforcers at this point. I have a funny thing on my computer where I filter the word enforcer for babysitter because that's essentially what enforcers are now, in which for a bunch of adults, which I think the concept of having an enforcer in hockey today is hilarious to me. It's like having a guy babysit adults, and it's hilarious.
yeah,
So, anyways, that's really all I have to say about zone starts. To me, they're important in how you analyze a player, on whether their Corsi is coming from their coach starting them in the offensive zone. Alain Vigneault did this a lot with Sedins, and John Tortorella came in and nixed that and made the Sedins play defense. And not that they're bad defensive players, it's just like you gotta use players to their forte sometimes, and that's something that we can talk about another time is how coaches use these players, how different coaches use these players, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we wanted to talk about today. We wanted to keep this at a half hour. It's 11:03. We've been at this for an hour, so
Yeah. So I guess we'll
I
wrap
guess we'll
this
leave
up.
off here. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too. So we'll see everyone next week at this time, or at an hour ago, I guess. So
Yeah,
see.
give or take a little time. I should be able to consistently make this every week. Tuesday's generally a light night for me, so that works. So,
Yeah.
all right.
And just once again, I'm on Twitter at Dancing on Highway HWY, and he is TJ Luckman, and on Twitter TJ Luckman 550.
And of
So
course, you can follow this entire program at our Hockey Cast. All one word, all spelled exactly how it sounds. Our Hockey Cast. So that's the show for today. Like I said, today was very introductory. Kind of want to go into the on ice application, kind of make it more interesting for people. So, I mean, I understand if today was boring, but trust me, we just wanted to get an introductory out of the way. So,
yep.
again, I'm TJ. He's Ben. This is the Puck Luck Podcast. Thanks for listening.